right. Okay. Here we are. Let me check on my internet. Hey, everybody. We're coming to you guys. Another episode of TATT Talks. Give me 1 second here. All right. So how was your day been? There I am. Okay. I'm going to share that to my page.
My days, brother. I'm above ground and I'm breathing, and every breath follows another breath. Let's go.
We can't. Yeah, that's right, man. I love that. I love that attitude. I love that posture. And that's how we're going to enter into this space. And I'm going to write, join us, and we are on. Man, everybody, thank you so much for joining on for another episode of TATT Talks. And I want to welcome everybody. Ooh, here we go. I'm trying to multitask. All right. Man, this is the second episode of this. I had a great time. Was it last Thursday with David Bahinga, who came on, young entrepreneur doing some great things. Today, I got my brother Aashik and give him an opportunity to present himself. And then next week, we have another great speaker lined up. So we're lining up these TATT Talks every Thursday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Keep it within an hour. We're going to be doing this throughout the month of April and May, and we'll continue throughout the end of the year. And so I have a lot of people who are excited. Actually, people are starting to reach out who want to be on this. But one of the criteria to be on is you've attended one of the events of the African think tank, or you're on the board, or we really want individuals who've interacted with the African think tank to have an opportunity to come on here and have a conversation. So we're going to jump right into it. And I think people will join as they come. We'll take questions, and maybe I'll find a way to plug them in there. But this is a great subject that we really want to afford a lot of time to. But first, I want to give an opportunity to our guest to introduce himself. And we talked earlier, so we've talked about a lot of things, kind of prep to this. So Aashik, again, tell us your name, if I pronounced it correctly, a little bit of your background for where you come from, and we'll go from there.
Well, Reuben, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm honored to be in this rotation of amazing guests, and I'm honored to be part of the African think tank and given this platform to socialize both the African think tank and Aashik Khakoo. So I say it with humility, but again, my name is Aashik Khakoo. I am of Indian descent, but I was born in Uganda. So that's why I have a foot in Africa, and I will always do so. I was in Africa from 1968 when I was born to 1969, perhaps, and I moved to the Bronx, New York. My parents brought us from Africa to the Bronx, where they had set up residence prior to my birth, and they're both they were both physicians of community service. So they worked in underprivileged neighborhoods. My father was a pediatrician at Harlem Hospital, which is a very heavy African American community. My mom was a obstetrician delivering babies in the South Bronx, and their cause was about service. They dealt with children. My father dealt with children with sickle cell anemia, and then AIDS, which are two epidemics that still exist, obviously. And my mom was a high-risk obstetrician gynecologist who delivered mamas that were unfortunately had drug-infested issues, and also then AIDS mamas. And she's delivered 3 generations of babies, so baby, grandbaby, and such. So they taught me service, although I might not have been listening as attentively at age 7 through 15, but I've heard all that, and that's what I learned, service. We stayed in New York I was in New York and did my schooling in New York, did some service in Florida for the U.S. Navy, so I'm a veteran. And then I moved here to Dallas in 2014, having had 3 children who are now 21, 19, and 17. I love the idea. I grew up in corporate America. I was in finance for big companies that had great opportunities. And then I ran a charity for children with cancer in Dallas. But what I brought to the table is just how to serve others and how to how to give back, and that's what I try to do. I love the African think tank. I think you guys are doing we are all doing an incredible job, and it's a great platform to be talking about that. And I also have a mental health condition. I'm a bipolar 2 cancer survivor. I mean, my bipolar 2 mental health survivor, and I take it very seriously. I talk about it wherever I can. I think we as humans have to be ambassadors for our opportunities. I don't really call them challenges or struggles. It's an opportunity to improve. We're going to make the best of every roadblock that God gives us. I'm a man of Christian faith, and I live day to day. This is God's plan I'm doing, and I'm proud to say that. And I'm blessed to have all these opportunities, and looking forward to the next part of my journey where the gifts He's given me, the gifts that God has given me, I'm prepared to give back to others.
Yeah, man, you threw up. You basically stretched out the whole conversation. So we're gonna kind of dig in here and kind of break it down again. So you tell us a little about your parents. How did they? You said they were in the States and they went to India. Went to Uganda. And what was that? What was the reason for that?
Sure. So my father was born in Zanzibar, and he did a lot of his early childhood in Zanzibar and Tanzania, which are both on the east coast of Africa. And then he went to India to do medical school training, and he met my mom in India, who is from India. And in 1960, they were both born in 1935. So they moved to the U.S. from India in 1962 with a green card and a job. And in 1964, my older sister was born in New York City, and apparently by the laws of the green card program back then, my parents had to leave the country for a year to retain their status in the U.S. And so what they did that year, they moved to Uganda, and that's where I was born. And they came back shortly thereafter, thankfully, because Idi Amin was right in their rearview mirror. He was not a very friendly, person or a friend dictator to Indians especially. But they moved back to the U.S. in 1969, back to the Bronx, and so now they had completed their U.S. immigration obligations. My younger brother was born in 1970, and they stayed in the Bronx their entire lives. That's where my father had a home, and my mom had a home, and that's where we were raised.
My mic is muted. So
Yes, sir.
particularly to Uganda, did you have family there? Or I know there was a large Indian population prior to Idi Amin
Yeah.
asking or removing the Indian population.
Right. No, so we didn't have family. We didn't have family. My dad had close friends and what have you, but our family was basically and still are in Zanzibar and Tanzania, so which are neighboring countries. So I was there in 1987 to visit his family, and it was a very very beautiful part of the world, really, if you think about it. And they're basically, but there's no family in Uganda, not that I know of.
Okay, good. Well, I think just it's important to speak about how individuals are connected to the continent, whatever way that may be. And I like how we want to always talk about the diversity of the African continent. And so when you were at the last mixer and having, I think it was Judy, who was of Chinese descent, and then there was my sister. I see her face, but her name is sleeping. Andrea,
Yep.
Nigerian, who actually was born in the U.S. and then went back, and then you of Indian descent, was born in Uganda, and so that diversity of the continent is very important. And I always like to, like we talked, I always like to talk about the stories of people prior to coming to the U.S. or what was your link in history before they come to the United States. So you're here in the States, growing up in the Bronx. How was that like? And how was it? What was your community like? What was it for you personally? What was the ups and downs and the challenge you had growing up in the Bronx?
Yeah, so it's interesting because as I think back to that, and it's very emotional. So forgive me if I get emotional, but this is my story. So if I don't, then who will? But I grew up in a mostly a diverse part of the Bronx. There was some upper middle class, I would say, and I went to public school from the first grade to the sixth grade, and then my dad invested in private schools for us, and that was a very homogenous community. It was mostly Caucasians, and it was a very interesting transition to go from a public school in the Bronx to a private school. Was interesting for me, and wasn't as it was hard. It was hard to adapt. It was hard to uh, get into community there, but we persevered. School grades were very important to the family, and that was where we were measured as to our how are things going, and we all did well. And um, but we still stayed in the Bronx, so we still had that piece of diversity, and we assimilated with people from Jamaica. My father thought Jamaica reminded him of Zanzibar, so we went to Jamaica almost every year for either summer or Christmas vacation, or in some cases both.
That's
So
cool.
through that connection, we grew with a lot of community within the Jamaican population, where his community, where the people from Zanzibar and from East Africa resided in New York, was about 45 minutes from where we lived. So we went there for religious services. I grew up in a Muslim household. And we had people come over to the house, but it wasn't as close as you would like, and it wasn't neighbors. It was more, it was a trek to get there. So we didn't do it as often as I think we would have liked, but we did fine. We had my uncle moved over here to Queens, New York, and then my cousins were there as well. So we had a nice handful of family and very close friends from very diverse communities.
So those trips to Jamaica brought back for your father the time he was in Zanzibar.
Yeah, it was the same. I mean, Zanzibar is like the Caribbean for the Nordic nations. So people from
Okay.
Scandinavia, from Sweden and Norway and Denmark. When I was there in '87, it looked like Club Med. It was all populated with the people from the Scandinavian countries, and it was equivalized to what Jamaica was for the U.S. and the Caribbean was for the U.S. So I could understand his correlation, and it was less expensive, and made practical sense. So that's why we did. That's why I think he did it most.
Okay. And you spoke a little about your education.
Yeah.
So you in the Bronx, you went through from elementary all the way to high school
Yes.
there, and you talked about, was it really a diverse? Again, you said some Jamaicans. Were there other groups represented?
Sure. So in the public school, we were in a public school in the Bronx, which took its own, the own shape that you'd express. You'd expect. There were, African Americans, there were Latino, and they were all a whole mix. When I went to private school, that was a very different community. It was expensive. My dad chose to invest in that, which I'm grateful for. But with that expense came a homogenization of the community. It was very, very Caucasian, very, people of wealth from the Upper East Side of Manhattan that came up to school there. And it took some time to get my feet underneath me in that community. But I had good friends, and I had good experiences, and they had. But as far as the diversity, it was more of a bubble than you would say New York City's diversity footprint would be.
Okay. Okay. So after your primary and secondary school, where did you go for higher education,
Sure.
and what
Yeah.
did you study?
So I went to Columbia University in New York City, and that was also a very interesting experience. It was diverse as you would think it would be. Everyone coming from around the world to go to Columbia, and that campus has all the under most of the all of the undergraduate and many of the graduate programs. So in one campus, you had students from all over the world studying anything from you know economics, like I was, or engineering, to business school, and the law school was on campus. The medical school was further off campus, but you had people from public affairs and all these beautiful programs that, and Columbia had a very a worldwide reputation, and still does. And so that was that community. Now, it was a little bit tricky because your campus was New York City, so we were all poor students, because that's what students are, at least in my experience. So going into the city for a meal or an event it wasn't cultivated for the student per se. But we found groups that were Indian groups and other diverse groups that we sort of connected with, and it was a great experience. It was interesting, but at the same time it was diverse, and really grateful for it.
Thank you. So what was your area of study? Did you already know that going to Columbia, or did that come out during your
Yeah,
time there?
yes. So my parents are both doctors, and my sister was also going. She was older than I, so she was going through toward the medical school track. She was 4 years older than me. So I was also on the medical track until organic chemistry, which kind of kicked my you know what, and from that I was done. So then I went into a business track and an economics track, and I studied economics at Columbia, and I wish I had
Okay.
done more there. I was exploring at that point. That's when if I could speak to it a minute, that's where my mental health situation and my opportunity started to bubble its head, and I was very distracted by that, and it was very tough to balance that and also a new environment, and I was living on campus and all those things that come with college transition, and this
Mhm.
mental health thing that I was still trying to figure. I was just starting to figure out what is going on.
Mhm. So, well, that's a good segue into this thing of mental health, because I want us to really focus on that. And that this is, I want to give a lot of time to that discussion, because even you and I talking about it, it was longer than an hour conversation,
Yeah.
and you're very passionate about it. And so I just want to make sure you can speak to as much of it in the time that we have. So you share that you would say that at Columbia, with all that was going on, the pressures you had, that's where the kind of um, the beginning of the mental health concerns or challenge that you had started began to bubble up, or they did and you weren't understanding what that was until later in
No,
life.
no, it's a great question. So that's where it sort of started to root and started to
Mm.
sort of it started to really grow, and I was introduced to
Well,
to a
let me.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, could you? Because there's people watching from around the world. Can you just kind of give the definition of mental health? Kind of paint a picture of that,
Yeah,
so people
sure.
can understand. Because we just say mental health, but
Right.
what are we talking
So
about?
yeah, so at that point, that was 1986, and at
Hmm.
that point, Zoloft had just come out of uh, I think it was Bristol Myers. I forget who the manufacturer was, but that was now the drug of choice for people with depression, and that's what in my opinion, looking at it from a consumer and also the community, everyone fell into that space. There were also people with schizophrenia, but anytime the idea of feeling malaise or feeling down, oh, you're depressed, take Zoloft, and that's what happened to me. And that ran for many, many years. But the inception was very tricky because I am a 17-year-old kid. My dad introduced me to a psychiatrist who was his colleague at Columbia, at the Harlem Hospital. I went to his 114th Street practice, his office. I sit there for an hour and I talk, and this particular uh, a therapist or psychiatrist, his mannerism was you just talk for an hour, and maybe he said a couple of words, maybe he furrowed his eyebrows a lot. I could see that. That's the feedback I was getting. But what was really challenging, and what I really want to share with the community is what we all need to do is to talk about it. My father, he invested in the therapy, he paid the check for the therapy, but we never really talked about what was going on in the room, and he kind of just left it at that. And that's not anything that he did, except that's what's a cultural. In 1986, it was more of a cultural stigma, more so it still is today, but it was very much more prominent. So you didn't talk
Hmm.
about it, and I only had one point of reference. Oh, so this is what therapy was. I saw things on TV, but that wasn't. I couldn't connect that. So
Yeah.
I struggled. I will say that I think had I done it differently, I would have asked my dad, let's talk about this. Let's really figure out, come into the therapist with me and let's talk about it among the three of us. We never really did that. And so,
And what you would, and you said that's part cultural as well, because I think within our culture, even at that time, I think even in Western culture, there was this not parent-child dynamics where you're
yeah,
not questioning or asking
right.
or having these open conversations with your parents.
Right. And even today in the Indian community, and I'm pretty sure any, you know, community where there's a pride of the family, sort of the root of the
Mhm.
family, and let's keep everything behind closed doors. I tell you, open the doors, let everything out, because we are our kids, the children need that help, that comfort. It's better. It definitely is better. But it was again. Had I had a chance to sort of write my notes to my dad, I said, let's just talk about it. There's nothing wrong with, if you had a upset belly, or if you had a diabetes, you would talk about, you would be more interactive.
Mm-hmm.
Mental depression at that time was almost like a taboo topic, and
Yeah.
it's just not fair to those who are in it, because it's just an illness of the brain, like anything other illness. Just
Mm-hmm.
let's deal with it. And I think people would be better served if you said, how was your therapist session? What did you guys talk about? What do you want to share with us? There's
Mm-hmm.
a sense of privacy also. You might talk about your parents in there. You don't want to talk about that to your parents. That's fine. But how is it working? Is this
Mm-hmm.
helping you? Is this working for you? Are you seeing some relief? Those questions were never asked. And that to me, culturally, that's an excuse. This is about helping your kids regardless of culture, and you have to step into it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. Now, they did the best they could, but
Yeah.
we've learned from that, because I talk to my kids about our mental health. It's in my family, right? So the kids have to know what's going on, because they've got my genes. So
Mm-hmm.
they've been very aware of the whole journey, and how they're feeling and things like that. And I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. No, it is. I mean, that education piece is really important because I work in a school right now as a substitute teacher, and I have a great boss, Amy Cabrera, and just being in that presence, learning about working special education and learning about that is because I'm in the presence of it, right? So I
Hmm.
see what's going on, ask questions, and we talked a little bit about how some of those things are especially tied to mental health because I work with a lot of international kids in there, and so some of those dynamics from the culture of what is being able to be provided for the kids, but at the same time you're against that tension of the cultural understanding. And so you talking about that, I can definitely see it because I had that in my own experience. So along that same vein of your journey, when would you say there was a moment of crisis? Because there was a moment of crisis as we talked where you didn't have that from your father at that time. You kind of walked with it yourself. And was there that moment of crisis where things broke and you
Yeah.
had to kind of pick up the pieces?
So let me say this, and I'll get sort of to this. I'm a solution based guy, and I can tell you through the challenges of therapy and the hospital visits and all that other stuff that comes with it when you don't when you get- a when you don't take care of yourself. So a lot of this is about what the mental depression or schizophrenia or bipolar 2 or whatever it is. My most important learning for me was to do the work for your be your self advocate, be your own self advocate. And Ruben, I'll tell you, I learned that it took me until about 2019 or 2020 it's only 5 to 6 years ago to realize that the difference in my therapy now is I'm doing the work. I'm working hard. I'm driving my discussions, staying compliant to the medicines, which is a very, mental health. People think, oh, well, they feel better after taking the medicine, and they stop taking the medicine, and we can't do that. We're sabotaging our trajectory. And so my suggestion, what you're asking is, there were so many pitch dips and troughs in this journey, but it all changed for the better when I started to realize I've got to do the work. And even since 2019 and 2020, there's still been some challenges and relapses, but you just have to get back on the horse and do the work. I have the
Mhm.
formula now that I didn't have then, but
Well,
still
could you
there.
give us,
Yeah.
yeah, with divulging or sharing as much as you want, could you give us some concrete examples of some of those challenges you had? I mean, because I think we have the outskirts, so we really want to dig into what does that look like, so that when somebody sees it, they can say, "Oh, okay, so these are some of the things that I'm recognizing."
Yeah. So
That you're talking about.
it was all driven around self-esteem and how I felt about myself and how people felt about me. And
Mhm.
that was kind of the nucleus of my challenge. And you know, going to a job, are you accepted there? Are you doing the right thing? Are you or even relationships, or even with your family? It was always like, am I good enough? I mean, that's kind of what my my chart notes say. It's a PTSD type thing with, am I feeling good enough? And that's where everything stemmed for. So, you know, as much as we try to do now is to self-correct, is to tell our boys, hey, you're whatever you do, I'll love you and I'll support you. And if you have a bad day or a bad situation, just talk about it. We're all good enough. I was not convinced of that as a young child. And so that was what I was chasing that got me into this path.
Mm-hmm.
Is looking at it back now. I mean, it's pretty clear to me as to what it looked like. Oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, you got B's on your test. Oh, you didn't make the baseball team, or you didn't get into Harvard, or whatever that benchmark is that you didn't make, makes you sort of support. Hey, no, I did the best I could. I didn't get in. Okay, let's just move on. That's kind of how you change the trajectory of the message, right? It's all become about your mindset and how you deal with adversity. And I'm grateful.
Yeah. No, good. And we see a lot of that, I think, still, especially with immigrants coming in, is like the drive is education. The drive is to be successful.
Yeah.
And I think that still highly exists. I think it's less so with more opportunity through technology and the world getting smaller, but definitely growing up, definitely in the 50s, 60s, 70s, as an immigrant into this country, you had one purpose. And that was to come and study, get a good job, work,
Right.
take care of the entire family. And that type of pressure definitely, I think, broke a lot of people that never had the opportunity to tell the stories that we're telling now. And so those journeys allow us to kind of craft a different message for this new generation as immigrant parents. But it still exists. It's something that, through the African think tank, we're addressing in many of our areas, those issues of stigma. And so, how did that even affect your professional journey? Because you talked about how you worked in the corporate world, and
Right.
I think that's a lot of pressure to, depending on what industry, all industries, but meeting deadlines, accountabilities, goals, outcomes, all those things while you're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a then versus now. I mean, back then, my compliance to my medicines and the way I operated my day to day, I could have done a much better job. And so when you try to say, are you controlling everything you can? I wasn't at the time. I am now, and I'm grateful for that. But it lends itself to changes in jobs and changes in industry, and I believe everything happens for a purpose. So I'm fine with where I'm at, but I think it's about doing the best you can with whatever you have in front of you. So I'm just very, and whatever that is. If my kids say I got a B on my test, did you do the best you can? I did. That's all you can do, and that's what we have to share with our children, and also find their passion. Because imagine if our kids at seven in the seventh grade said, Dad, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a lawyer, or I want to be an engineer, or I want to be a painter, a plumber, or a carpenter. Whatever that passion is, we should be confident enough that let's let them cultivate that passion and give them everything we can to drive that passion, even by Indian standards. If that's not exactly what you were taught as a child, teach differently, because that kid who's got a seventh grade idea of being a painter or an artist or a carpenter, if he or she runs with that passion for the rest of their lives, they'll never work a day in their lives. If you could find your child that passion in their little finger and they run with it, it'll be a joy. They'll find their happiness. They'll find their purpose. And I wouldn't want to have our children live to the standards that I was asked to live to. And that's just learnings, right?
Too much. So have you found, this journey definitely has led you to find a community. We all go through some type of trauma or something that leads us into certain community. We've connected in a community through the African think tank. We're connecting in other areas. What areas are you finding community?
Thank you for asking this. So I'm a big fan of Bible study. I do men's Bible study groups as often as I can. In terms of, I'll do 2 or 3 Bible studies a week, I'll talk about, just to get in front of men to talk about what's going on. I want to pursue the industry of mental health. So I want to go back into the mental health industry and do a job and be part of that, because I think I have been given gifts of my experiences that I feel I have to give out, and I want to do that. So I'm more of I'm a businessman. I've got a great, I've been blessed and fortunate to have a great business experiences, but I want to take that, and my passion is about mental health. So talks like this, going to companies and talking at lunch and learns with their staff, going to working for treatment centers or rehabilitation centers or mental health communities, companies. That's where I'm looking. I know that's where I can add value and really help change. If I change one life, I'm ecstatic. That's what my goal is. But I just want to share what I'm saying to you today as part. This has become my passion, so I want to just run with it.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you're running with it. I think, one things we at the African Think Tank, we're there's a great deal of excitement in what we're doing, the connectivity, the networking, but we've also seen some of the challenges that people face and how they're facing those challenges alone. And we talk a lot about Ubuntu, we talk about the communal thing, and so we can't forget that in this journey, there's going to be a lot of pressures, and there got to be some downtime and some alone time to regain some strength and some community time to do that. And some of those barriers are even within us. As some of those challenges of us growing up in that culture, how then do we rid ourselves of the things that were not beneficial while holding the things that we want to definitely pass along? So I definitely understand that. You said you want to go back into the mental health industry because of the passion that you have accumulated there. And what is that generally in any specific, working with any demographic, or this specific demographic that you're looking to work with?
So it's multiple spokes. One of the things I'm pursuing is to become a licensed therapist, whether that means get my master's, my doctorate, or what have you, to have credentials to help in a therapy, to be that therapist on the other side of the room with people who are entering, who are looking for therapy to help themselves. But I think my experience helps that possibility, gives it a different sense of credibility and experience that I can work with. Also my finance background to go into as an anything from a peer support specialist or or someone on staff to be a sounding board. If someone's got say that they want to talk about things that are in their mind, or how do you deal with this? I'll only really share from the experiences I've had to tell them I wouldn't tell them what to do. I just say, this is what I've done in the past, and go from there. But it's about getting into that space to share what I've learned about this mental health, and it's doing speeches. You have a great platform here that's growing, and to do these times 1,000, to just get that same message across, because someone will listen, and someone hopefully will learn and pursue what's going on in their minds and what's going on with them, how they're feeling.
So I think just sorry, my question, especially a lot with immigrants who come over, it's not all we talk about. I'm going to take two spokes here, and then we can talk. We'll break that down. You have those individuals who just are able to move here, right? They're doing well, but they find opportunities and come, and now are in this culture. And it was an easy fit. Number two, you have the trauma of like war or famine that pushes individuals to find quote unquote greener pastures or safer pastures from where they come from. And that comes with a lot of trauma. I think part of that is also mental health. Have you had an experience working with like immigrant communities in that space of how do they handle coming from traumatic areas of violence and trying to come and live in this space?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. So I haven't had experience with the international trauma victims. I have had some experience with the veterans of the U.S.
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
a veteran, right? So I've seen how vets think about how do they transition from the military lifestyle, the military family to general population, and it's very tricky. And so where you hear about this trauma, as you said, it's all these men and women who are going overseas to fight for us and are coming back with PTSD and diagnoses of what they've seen and what they've experienced. They may not be international, but they're still seeing the same famine and war and things that you describe, and they're coming back here with not enough resources to talk about it, not enough avenues to get help. It's getting better, without a doubt, but it can definitely improve. And that's where I did mention earlier my previous experiences, but being part of the veterans community, I've just explored this community of what they have to offer for me as a vet, and I love it. And I love the idea of being part of it and being working for the VA and being part of that community to help for mental health, finance, things that I have learned. So it's a bit of a meld. One thing I also try to do is help the vets. Help with their finances and how to stabilize their situation financially, and also how do you get ready for a general population type of job that you want? How do you prepare for an interview? And this is where I'd love to help the folks at the African think tank. They come from overseas to the U.S. Not a lot of them are getting training on how do I get transition into the employment part of my responsibility. How do I get a job? How do I interview? How do I network? So all those components are things I've worked on, and I'm happy to support wherever I can, because it's important.
How would you do it from the other end? So I was talking about immigrants, but leadership, like CEOs, organizations who maybe clamor about how we want to have diversity, or we want people from different parts of the world coming in, and that's great on the idea of building your organization and your business, but then you're still dealing with people, right?
Yeah.
So how are they? And I think you may talked about talking to CEOs or COOs and
Yeah.
two things: the mental health they're dealing with in leadership because you've been there, but also that if they're working with a diverse group, how are they cognizant of mental health issues at
I think I think what we have to educate that community that you described, the leadership in business, is they don't have to know it all. They don't have to know how to do that. What they have to do is try to access the resources that are available, because the mental health resources are there is so much out there, that between the National Association of Mental Illness to other organizations to help people get the help they want. But it's like you don't know what you don't know, so people don't know that to look for that. The role of this conversation with CEOs is delegate your mental health, sort of the needs of your people, of your staff, to the mental health experts that are available, and let them go and have these employee assistant programs where staffers can get therapy sessions at a very low cost to get themselves situated, and make that accessible to your to your companies, because that's what they just want, an outlet to have that. It's like delegating, all things around business. You're not going to do, as a CEO, you're not going to do it all. You're going to have a head of marketing, a head of sales, a head of IT. Well, here's your head within your employee HR department. You should have, people that can get resources for to understand and protect their mental health wherever they are in that space.
Mhm, mhm. And I assume there's a correlation there as well. I want to speak to, not everybody here is religious,
Yeah.
but in your specific journey, there is a spiritual component to it, and so I would like you to speak to that a little bit because it is part of your
Sure.
personal journey.
Well, thank you for asking. So here's the deal with religion. I don't profess that. I'm a Christian. That I grew up in a Muslim household. I'm a Christian. I don't profess anybody to. I'm not going to convert anybody. I'm going to tell people what I think helps me, whether you call it a higher power or universe or something to hang your hat on to help you through those struggles. That's what worked for me. Um, you know, I've got great relatives that are relatives that are Muslim, and they believe in that faith as strongly as I believe in mine, and that's perfectly fine. The the idea is to rely on something beyond you for help, and it's a great it works it's very it's very emotional. It's a great way that I can work teach my mindset, teach me to how to be more gentle with myself, how to be more receptive to challenge, and how to really work through it. Um, that's nothing to be looked at. Once you get faith in your foundation, whether that be higher power, the universe, whatever, however you describe it, it lends itself to real great things for you. It give you a chance to put all that stress to that component, and I try to give my stress and my struggles to my God, and it feels great. It's a great, it's almost like a great parachute for me. It's a
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a definitely a spiritual component that resonates with individuals so that they can tackle these issues, and it's different down the road. I think the whole thing that's the same around whatever faith you are, is that the mind is important. Like it is that's where things break
yeah.
in people's mind, and then that's what leads to a lot of actions that, whether are deliberate or not deliberate, and that affects society as a whole. So that's why we, especially within the African community, or not, I don't want to say, I was speaking of African community, but non-Western communities, I see more of this communal aspect of us getting together, because that is part of our addressing our mental health.
Yeah.
And it's
And
not simply. Go ahead.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One thing I'd like to add to the spiritual component,
Mm-hmm.
when you find people that have the same spiritual definition as you do. So for me, for men in Bible study who believe in Christ, or even in the world of Buddhism or any of the other religions, the conversations you have go beyond sort of the water cooler deal of how the Cowboys do and how's the weather. You're really having engaging conversations that then lend itself to have further conversations about how you are really feeling. And that's what happened with us at the cigar um, bar in Fort Worth, the Cigar Lounge. We started to talk about all things, about family and how things are doing professionally, and it lends itself just to that community. It's just another way of being in community. You could play soccer with your friends, you could go golfing. Faith is just another uh, common sort of interest that you share that lets yourself get to know others, and then you're talking. The idea is to how do you talk to each other when organically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that conversation piece, asking open-ended questions, that's what we did as when we met with
Yeah.
that group, is really allowing individuals to to speak just what they're feeling, and that's
Right.
hard. I think either you brought up, another guy brought up, like, as men, it's really difficult to have that conversation,
Yeah.
or in a way that can be understood. Um, but you have to have that kind of diversity of individuals who can pull you out of that. So.
And just to build on that, and sort of, I don't want to go all over the place, but as it relates to mental health, I'll tell you, I don't have the statistics, but I'll get into an Uber, for example, and talk to the driver just to get to make conversation. And if I mention anything about my mental health, I would say 9 times out of 10, they're going to mention something about their experiences or something about someone they know. People want to talk about this, but they just need the opening to talk about it. And what I like to try to think is just provide that opening and then listen, because I think people really have something to say, and it's a question of whether it be religion, or whether it be my mental health situation, or it's just a conversation of who getting to know people, beyond the surface topics, if you will.
Mhm. What organizations or individuals would you recommend for people to pursue in trying to deal with their mental health?
So yeah, so
I've
the
seen it. I
best,
think I've seen one or two of your interviews
yeah,
with some organizations.
I'm a big fan of the National Association of Mental Illness, and they help anywhere from parents who have children in the space or people who are discovering for themselves. They have support groups across the country. They have tons of resources that you don't know about these resources until you're in looking for them. But that I would start there. It's www.namI.org. That stands for National Association of Mental Illness.org, and they have a website that's phenomenal that get you resources, whether it be information or therapists or counselors, whatever it is you need. It's the best one I've worked with.
Mm-hmm. Is that the one you did the interview with? The lead, I see it. Was that you did an interview with?
I did. Yeah. So that interview was with my therapist. My former therapist. He's trying to trying to get more involved with the veterans of the community that need help. And so that interview was with that platform.
Okay. We got about 15 minutes, and I want to ask you, but if you have questions, anybody who's viewing, please ask questions. It's a good opportunity to ask questions of Aashik's upbringing, his education, especially anything around the mental health piece. You have any questions? I'll read a couple comments here. One from Ms. Cabrera: a diverse therapist would be excellent in the schools to enhance immigrant families. I'll take that as a thought. What do you think about that statement?
Well, that's a great thought. I think it's like anything else. If a child sees somebody that looks like them, they're going to be more apt to want to talk to them, and they're going to relate to them. And I think the diversity component is a great suggestion to be part of your community. It just makes sense for anything you'd want, because people attract to those that look like them. So I think it's a great suggestion.
And I think that they have certain experiences as well. I think maybe individuals who have come out of, civil wars or all of that and are doing well can speak into the lives of those who've gone through that same journey.
That's a great comment.
Help things because you can speak to something intellectually, but there's a feeling component. I think that's one of the things that I get out of the African think tank is. I talk to people in Africa all the time, but when I'm in a space with fellow Africans, there's certain things that don't require explanation or definition, or it's just that common feeling of Ubuntu that we have in that space as well. So we're down to 12 minutes or so here. So what would how did you again hear about the African think tank? And what drew you to the organization specifically? And you sit on, I think, one of our boards, if I'm not mistaken, the steering committee. Yeah.
Right. So I I was last year, I want to say May, June, or July of last year, and I went to one of the events at Fusion Vibes, which was on 75 in Richardson. And I went and I just observed. I went there. I don't know how I got the invite, but I got it. And I went there and I saw they had one side they had all the vendors with all the clothes and all the wares that they were selling, and then in the restaurant they had some great food and great discussions and a wonderful hostess. And then I met Dr. Sidoni at that event, and then we had breakfast the following Monday. So just a few days later, and I said, "Look, I'll do what I can to help you." And I liked the organic feel of it. I liked the mission that we're all trying to strive toward, and I think there's a great opportunity where we can make change. And so it wasn't much to convince me. It's she's got a very strong presence and a very dynamic team. I mean, your energy, Reuben, is captivating, and we're all in this together. And so that's how I landed. And I took a role last year, and now I'm on the steering committee and special advisor and fundraising. So helping out in a couple of ways, but we need to really make sure that we are building this from bottoms up and ask for the needs and tell people what's going on and what we're trying to do. And I'm doing that as much as we can. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, with just maybe with the vendors, we bring a lot of entrepreneurs in that space who have goods to sell. But we also want to start bringing people who have services. And I think one of those is you being on there and speaking about mental health is bringing organizations that would be willing to come and talk about that, because I think behind closed doors or in private, those conversations are having within our community. And to your point, we need to bring that out into the open. And people say, man, I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm really struggling. Not with my business, but just with my mindset and all these other things. Here's a question from Mbella. Tonge Mbella, I think your last name is. Hi, Aashik. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Oh God.
Don't we have a lot of advice to give to our 20-year-old selves, man?
We all do. I mean, I would just say, I would say, Aashik, do the best you can with what you got. Go and be your best advocate. And when you don't feel something's right, raise your hand and tell that. And don't worry about the standards that you're measured to. Don't worry about what people are. Be yourself. Find your passion, and be your best resource. Because that's what I am now, and that's what I tell my boys, and my boys are doing great in that sense. But we have to be there to support them. But I would say we all are. I have a corny saying. I'm just going to say it. I tell myself that I'm the CEO of my own life. God is my chairman. God is the chairman of all our lives, and I'm the CEO of my own life. And Reuben, you're the CEO of your own life. We all are. And it's how do you organize your life, not by yourself, but with your support team. So go out and organize your life, find your support team, find your passion, and do you the way you want to do you.
Well, thank you. Man, great questions are coming in.
Okay.
If we have more, we still have about 9 minutes for questions. This is from a good friend of mine, Zenith. And she has she put together a great organization of African podcasters, and I'm part of that. And so I'm sure she'd love to have you as a guest for her podcast and getting others. And she actually broadcasts a lot in Africa, in Zambia. And so that's why, I think in this world of technology, we may operate locally, but we have an international reach, and whatever we do, there's interconnectedness there. So Zenith asked, what strategies can help raise awareness about mental health resources and reduce stigma in immigrant communities?
That's so how do you say her name? Because I want to address her.
Zenith.
Zenith, I'll tell you, Zenith, here's the deal. Yeah, I'm fiddling on this camera because I'm doing this for the first time in a while, so you can improve my appearance when I'm on your show. But that all said, it's all about messaging. It's all about feeling safe to have the conversation. Because I tell you, I've lived this, where people, once they hear that you've given them the door to talk about something that's provocative or that's taboo or that's not or has a stigma associated with it, once you start talking about it, you've now opened the door, and people are chomping at the bit to talk about it. Talk about mental health. Talk about growing up from an African country. Talk about whatever you can to help people talk back. And the most important thing of that is then once they start talking back, listen. Don't yeah but them. Just listen, because they have a lot to say, and just saying it makes you feel wonderful. Just saying it gets it out there.
And so that was and that's part of also reducing stigma in immigrant communities, is also getting the parents engaged, right? Because how your parents did the best they could, parents, again, who are coming here, how do we get them involved? We're about their kids, but also them, and trying to change their kind of cultural way of parenting. There's things that they need to hold fast, but there's other things that they need to also recognize.
And if you relate that mental health is just, it's a mental health situation like mine is just an illness like diabetes is to your body. It's just challenging because nobody can see it on your face. You're not able to see it visually, but at the same time, it's just an illness. Just treat it like that, and do all the prescribing and the visits, and find the right doctor, and have the conversations among your family, because that will help your family.
Question. And I think also, as you were talking, I was thinking about Culture Bridge. One of the things that we do with the African think tank, and we're working with, I think, 6 to 12-year-olds right now, and giving them the history of Africa, around the food and the clothing and things of that nature. And that's part of us combating mental health, because one of the things I've noticed working in schools is that a lot of kids, especially this generation, if they're minority kids or African American kids or Black kids, Indian kids who grew up here, is there's a lack of identity. So they're very smart. I've sat a kid who was doing great in math, but I just couldn't understand his behavior and his attitude. And after a while, we got to talking. He's like, he's trying to identify who he is, and he's trying to figure out where he belongs, and all this other stuff is just noise to him that he's got to do, but he's just grasping for an anchor. And I think Culture Bridge, for us specifically within the African community, is trying to give those anchors to our young people as they grow up in this culture, and then engage within a culture that their parents want them to know about, right? So that's kind of, in a way, we're addressing that mental health piece early with our young people by giving them a sense of identity.
Yeah.
Did you lack a sense of identity yourself?
Sure. I think
identity is a big word.
I think Cultural Bridge is an incredible program, because what it's doing is taking first generation African children whose families moved here, and now they're being raised in the U.S., and they're reintroducing them to Africa and the culture that they came from, and at the same time, I think what the parents, what I would try to do as a parent is say, all right, how was school today? How are you feeling about being the only African in your classroom? Or how are you being treated by your class? You have to ask the provocative questions that don't just get a yes or a no or maybe or I forgot. Ask them the questions that are open-ended to get them to talk about what's going on. Because the sooner you do that, the sooner they'll be used to it. And they'll just be, and they'll slowly open up, and you just have to be perseverant. Okay, go observe your classroom. How are they assimilating? How are their friends developing and treating them? The whole thing with bullying has got to be addressed. The whole thing with being diverse and different has to be addressed. But they should be. I love the idea that we're teaching them their roots and their heritage, because that's what they should bring to the table and be proud of. And so if they know that, they gain an identity by having that in their toolbox to bring that to conversations, and that will resonate with their people they connect with.
That's awesome. I like how you say they gain an identity. They're not replacing anything, and that's an advantageous thing. It's like if they can get that. No, I'm just gaining more. Right. Quickly, Jedediah Peterson makes this great comment. Says the village culture is the biggest stigma for most of the young Africans growing away from the villages that some parents left decades ago, right? Yeah. Because the parents have broken away from that, and they're in a new space. Of course, that generational thing, generation will continue. Let me read some of these comments. Wow, from Sidonie, Dr. Sidonie Niba. Wow, as a parent, I haven't been intentional about this. Asking my kids open-ended questions. Thank you, Aashik. Relnet, how can someone protect mental health well-being and stay resilient while navigating cultural shock, toxic family dynamics, and the pressures of belonging, following passion, building career business, and supporting loved ones as an immigrant entrepreneur in a challenging environment? We're going to leave it at that as the last question.
That's another hour. Extend time.
Let's just wrap it on that one.
Here's the deal. I'll tell you exactly, because I believe it or not, and this is how I'm going to answer it.
Yeah.
As a human, you have to learn to love yourself. I had to learn how to love myself before I could love anybody else. And by love, you mean what is your love yourself for who you are, for all your bumps and bruises, all your experiences. Love yourself. Once we do that, everything else follows. And in the sense that I'll find my entrepreneur. I'll get the business part of it. I'll get my kids engaged. It's a lot. There's no doubt. And I guess he summed it up in a nice comment. But the nucleus is that we all learn to love ourselves for all good and bad in us. We're all human. We all have opportunities to improve, and we've done great things. And we have to recognize that. Love yourself internally, then you can love out to others.
Okay. Great. We'll end it on that. We got to bring you back for another conversation. We will do that because some of this will be recurring. I thank everybody for being here. The questions asked. We're going to leave your information when we put this live. How someone can contact you, the places. Can we add it? Oh, people are asking. Can we add an extra 30 minutes? No, we haven't even gone that. I'm willing to add. Can it keep going until it goes off? Are you willing to stay on?
Did you pay for the extended time version of this?
I don't know. I can ask. Let me. Ellis. Okay. Well, answer that question. I know you had more to say about that question on culture shock and toxic family dynamics. Can you speak to that? I'm gonna get on here and see if we can add, but unless someone cuts us off.
Look. Here's the deal, okay? And my Bronx colloquialism comes out sometimes, so bear with me. But we can only focus on one thing at a time. In the reality of how we love to multitask and how we love to be great leaders, but my perspective is I had to really, many years ago, I had to really go back and learn how to love myself. And then, okay, that happened, and that continues to evolve, and I continue to cultivate that. Then you work on loving your family. Love is by far the most precious commodity we can reach out. It's just to love others, and it's not anything religious. It's not anything faith. It's just love. It's just if you love others, you will go a long way with how you feel about yourself. And if you try to do service for others, I think that's also an important component. But as far as cult dynamics and all that stuff will figure itself out if you have that base. If you have for me, it's a God foundation. For me, it's loving myself and then loving others and then service. And everything else follows. The job follows, the career path, your interests, how your family sees you, how your children see you, what you're teaching them. You have to love yourself internally, and it's not easy. It's not easy, but it's worth the investment of time that you do to figure out how to love yourself.
Okay. Well, we will have to bring you back.
Okay,
I think that's the best way to do it. And even bring you back on this live, but also having the in-person discussions because people are getting back asking questions. There's got to be a part 2, about 30 minutes.
Okay.
And there's more things they want to dig more in depth with. But again, until that time comes, we want to make sure we give information to people that they can call you directly and ask you questions, whether it's organizations looking for some of your expertise to either join the boards or I think opportunities for employment or just individuals who are asking some of their questions. So we will definitely put all your information that you give to us.
Yeah. Thank you.
With all those stipulations on it. But again, thank you so much. And I think you've said everything that can be said. And I do want you to say more, but then more people are like, I got another question.
I mean, the only thing I'll say is
dying thing you're wanting to say, or the thing that's really wanting to know.